Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our Ideas Monthly Panel Series. I'm Evelyn Espinal, your moderator for today. After over 30 years leading transformational change in multinational Fortune 100 companies, I've joined forces with Natasha Rainey, host of the All Included podcast, and we've launched this premier DEI learning community. This is where some of the world's top DEI executives and practitioners are coming together to share insights and co-create solutions for unspoken and yet to be tackled issues that are confronting the DEI field. Our ambition is to accelerate the realization of inclusion, diversity, equity, activism, and social impact. And that's exactly what IDEAS stands for. Today, our expert panelists will be delving into the issue of data and how data has impacted DEI. And also for all of us practitioners that are trying to think about what do we do, this is an opportunity to hear about how to increase our effectiveness through our analytics. We'll be discussing how companies are integrating data into the framework of how they listen to employees and manage employee engagement, and also how they're using data to promote accountability. I'm joined today by Marina, Meisha, Andy, and Kalifa. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited. I want to just do a very brief intro to you and then get right into our audience hearing from you, who you are and why you're in this field. So starting first, we have Kalifa Oliver, the Global Director of Employee Experience and Analytics Strategy at Ford. She is passionate and committed to brilliant employee experience. Her ambition is to democratize data and allow action to happen. And she's the proud author of a new book titled, I Think I Love My Job. Highly recommend it. I got mine on Amazon just a few days ago. Marina Pearce, Director of People Strategy and Analytics at Salesforce. As an HR leader and organizational psychologist, Marina has spent her career influencing companies' success through data-driven, business-aligned, user-friendly HR practices. Her organization at Salesforce takes on strategic HR research and analytic projects related to key company priorities, which include DEI. Meisha-ann Martin, Senior Director, People Analytics and Research at Workhuman. Meisha is a proudly Jamaican-born and American by choice individual. Fantastically, she has passionate for how people experience work and has a love of experiencing other cultures through food and travel. And last but not least, we have Andy Biga, Chief People Officer at GoHealth Urgentcare. He's the proud papa of Tyson and Sophia. He's passionate about increasing access to high-quality healthcare and delivering a world-class team member experience. Thank you all for your participation today. And I just want to start out by asking you if you could tell us a bit about why you're in this field. What is the driver and the purpose for you in the work that you do? So whoever would like to start.
I can start.
I can.
Kalifa, we're gonna fight for it.
Go on.
So all right. So since you and I are fighting for it, I'm just gonna start out by saying Kalifa's book, I Think I Love My Job, is amazing and brilliant, and you need to cop it like right now. Okay, so introducing myself, I'm a workplace researcher and activist. I'm also a Libra, which is kind of a weird thing to say because I don't believe in astrology really, but the joke is on me because I am the Libraest Libra that ever did Libra. So if you see the symbol for Libra, it's all about, justice and equality. And this is why I'm in this field, because that is what I stand for. I believe deeply in people having the ability to live a good life and having that ability and access regardless of who you are, where you're born, and who you love. And so that's why I'm in this field. I'm fighting for the dignity of work for every human being. And that includes not only access to work, but the dignity part is important as well, right? So access to a positive work experience, no matter who you are, who you love, or where you were born. Kalifa, over to you.
Thank you, Meisha-ann, and thank you for that shout out. But so I have all spent my career focused on employee experience and bringing together employee experience and data. I've worked for several large companies. I've consulted for small companies, startup tech companies, and my focus has always been, my passion has always been around creating brilliant experiences at work and the responsibility of the organization in creating that experience and also in mitigating the trauma that is associated with work that we often do not talk about. I think what I want to do in my work is have an impact on the experiences people have because work is a significant part of their lives, but also getting people to the center work as the center of their lives by ironically people centering the design of work, right? And so I think that's what I've been really focused on. And then I'm a data nerd, so I got to throw a lot of data inside of that to make it happen. So, and since we're throwing stuff, I'm gonna throw it over to Marina.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Marina. I lead enterprise research and analytics and insights work at Salesforce. My why is a very nerdy one. It's true curiosity. I love human behavior at work. I love trying to understand why systems of humans, why we don't coordinate our efforts effectively despite needing to coordinate in order to deliver products at scale within a company, why we don't optimize access to unique and new ideas and experiences, despite the fact that that would help us be more successful as a collective. And I like affecting it, watching change and improvement happen, seeing employees become more engaged, more included, more successful. Kalifa mentioned that there can be trauma at work. I find my joy helping to fix that. Happy to be here today. I'll pass it to Andy.
Hey everyone, I'm Andy Biga. I lead up our people team here at GoHealth Urgentcare. We don't use the dreaded HR word here. We're a people-based business, and our centers are really nearly 300 of them. The whole goal is to provide high-quality access to on-demand healthcare, and they're all delivered through a partnership with a large and leading health system in each one of our markets. From my why perspective, I've never had DE or I in my title, but it's always been my North Star from a career perspective. So, when I went to graduate school to become a psychologist, I really wanted to focus on studying the differences that exist among all people, and then the commonalities that we share. And I've always been amazed by, no matter who you put in a room, I'm confident that you can find some common ground to bond over. And I always have found those connection points to be extremely empowering and impactful. Excited to be on this esteemed panel and looking forward to today's conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. I know this is going to be a very exciting discussion about data. And the first question that we typically ask in our format is, what is the unspoken in your field? What's not being said that we need to explore? And we find that this is really helpful because you are the experts that are in this data every day. So I'd love to start with Marina and then hear from all of you if that's possible.
Sure. I think I have two answers and I'll try to be efficient with them. One is noise. There's a lot of noise that gets in the way of what we do. There's a lot of noise in general around DEI practices and initiatives and investments, especially over the last few years. But making progress on things like representation, fairness, culture, experience, those are long-term areas of focus. The importance of diversity for innovation, or the importance of fairness for motivation, or the importance of general culture for business results is true in perpetuity. I think about how at Salesforce we have set and we continuously work toward specific equality goals that are due like many years from now. We maintain our focus on that, on those objectives. We continue to work toward them. And so I guess, I don't know, I always try to put a sort of actionable spin on any reflection. So my advice and what my team tends to do in that space is we try to find ways to tune out short-term noise in favor of sticking to solid data-driven interventions that help us make real progress toward those actual long-term goals that are attainable. And the second thing that is more like, I don't know, unspoken, I don't feel like it's unspoken among us or among people that are really in the data all the time, but it seems to be unspoken maybe across broader HR and maybe across companies, many of the questions that pop up in our space are not brand new questions that have not been thought of before. We can learn a lot by looking to others, by looking to, many decades of research, many established practices and ideas. And so sometimes our role is about highlighting that rather than kind of like thinking that we need to start from scratch and answer questions as though they are in fact brand new.
Thank you.
Sure.
I can go next. So one of the things I think we're not talking about enough today in this space is employee resource groups. And sure, we're talking about them conceptually, but we are not talking about them in a data-driven way. And that relates to a couple of things. Number one, the data about that experience. I am currently doing research in this space, and what we're consistently finding across different samples is that people who participate in employee resource groups are actually more stressed than people who do not participate. We have a large portion of each sample saying they're doing all of this work that they're never acknowledged or recognized for. And then we also have data to show the difference in outcomes on things like psychological safety, stress, identity safety, for people who are thanked for that work versus people who are not thanked. So conceptually, we're not talking about this enough. The idea that, you are asking the people affected the most to do the most work, and you're not acknowledging those efforts, right? And then also in terms of the other side, like the impact that ERGs are having, we're not talking enough about that data. How do you measure the effectiveness of an ERG apart from just people showing up to an event, right? So I just feel like there's more research needed around that and more data-driven conversation needed around employee resource groups, how they're structured, who's doing the work, the impact on the employee experience, on the members, and also on other members of the organization as well.
Excellent point. I'm really interested in this research and would love to delve into that with you when you have an opportunity.
Absolutely.
Andy,
I'm a troublemaker, so I have to make trouble.
hence why we invited you.
So, so when we talk about the things that are unsaid, I'm going to take my cue from Marina, and I got two things, but I'll say it fast. The first one is that DEI has never been an actual priority for most organizations. That is a reality that we don't like to talk about, right? It's been a priority for people, it's been a priority for parts of the organizations, but from an organizational, strategic, and operational standpoint, it has never been a priority for most companies. In fact, it's been a reaction. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing now, because it was never a priority, and we just don't want to admit at the highest levels that it has never been a priority, and we're not calling people out on the fact that it was never a priority to begin with. So that's the first thing. The second thing is DEI will never go away. It will never go away. We can change the name, we can take the title out, we can delete the word equity, we can do what we want. But the only way for innovation to happen, the only way for us to evolve is you need diverse perspectives. And we're spending so much time on the most narrow definition of DEI and diversity that's why we're here, because we think it can go away by not saying it. It's not Beetlejuice. If you don't say it 3 times, it's not going to show up, right? And I think that is the thing we don't talk about. Like, okay, fine, we don't call it that. We get rid of the DEI group, we get rid of the DEI work, but does it ever really go away? It does not, and that's why it will keep coming back up, no matter what you think you can call it.
Yeah, it resonates for me when I think about the practitioners who will often say to me, I'm in this role so that eventually we don't need to have this role. And to me, that's such a fallacy, right? You can't go into this work thinking that human behavior and human dynamics are going to stop being important to organizations that are based on how these people come together to collaborate and create something. Thank you, Kalifa. Andy?
Yeah, just to dive in and to kind of build off of that, I think I always have concerns around burnout associated with the work. So if you kind of, if we just play back what we spoke about, um, there's realizing that the work's never going to be fully realized or accomplished, and so that mission accomplished component's not going to be something that's easily recognized. And I think there's a general lack of willingness to kind of acknowledge progress out of valid reasons, where people are concerned that it might slow down progress. And so if you think about, an unwillingness to kind of acknowledge progress and celebrate some of the wins along the way for good reason, and knowing that the job's never done, I do think that in my mind, you put those two things together, and I just have deep concern for burnout with folks who love this work and are focused on it. How do you continue to find ways to inspire the work that you lead every day? And I'm hoping it's coming to events like this, but even more deeply, like how do you make sure that you as an individual are able to kind of overcome some of these challenges, because it's deeply meaningful work, it's impactful work for folks who've been in the space, but that burnout piece I think is real, and I don't think we always talk about that enough as folks who are in the space.
So I just want to cut in here and say, Andy, it means a lot to me to hear you say that, because there are a couple of components to burnout. Like, one is the objective part of everything you're doing.
Yep.
And then one is how it feels. And what we consistently find in our research is that, if you're doing things that are under acknowledged, right, it increases that perception of burnout. And just somebody saying, like you, right, that this is hard, right? Here is why it's hard. I see you doing all this work. Like, that acknowledgement means so much to me. And I encourage people who are listening who go, hey, what can I do to have an impact in this space? Do something similar to what Andy just did, and even go, hey, I know this is hard. I see you. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for continuing to do this work.
And to your point, to all of your points, DEI is exhausted. Caring and having passion about something is very exhausting, especially when you go into it knowing that there's often like this moving target that you're constantly having to deal with, and you're subjected to so many economic and political and social factors and fallacies that you always have to kind of start from scratch each and every time. You know what I mean? Every time you just drop to the bottom and you got to start over again. And that's one of the things when you talk about people who participate in ERGs being more exhausted. If you've ever participated in the ERG, you understand, because there's no room. Again, it's not a priority. So room is not created for this to be a part of a job. So this is another job, right? And you're telling the most marginalized people, the most historically marginalized and impacted people, to solve your own problem for free. What? Right? And it doesn't make sense. We wouldn't do that for any other victims of any other thing except where it comes to prejudice and bias. And that's why this is such exhausting and thankless work, and it should not be, but it remains that way for all the reasons discussed here today.
It's fantastic. This is such a powerful conversation for our listeners who tend to be practitioners that might be in smaller to mid-sized organizations and don't have the benefit of having a full analytics team or access to the kind of expertise that you all bring. It would be really fantastic if you could talk about what are the kind of data points that people really need to be tracking in order to make a significant change in their organization, whether that's moving the needle on DEI or holding leaders accountable. So how do we make sure that with the minimal resources that we have, we're gathering the right data and having the right analysis and discussion? I'd love to hear from Meisha-ann and Marina to start, but open to everybody.
So I'm going to give a politician's answer on this. And the politician's answer is it depends. Right after George Floyd was murdered, and I deliberately say murdered instead of killed, by the way, I do, because that's what I mean. So right after he was murdered, I wrote an article, and the title of it was, from moment to movement, because I wanted to inspire people to create a strategy that was sustainable. And so rather than giving people, hey, you should measure these 5 magic things, I am more in favor of a process. And Andy's heard me talk about this before. I've used this process, throughout my career, and I call it the Nirvana approach, because I really believe in people, number one, doing a root cause analysis. So where DEI is concerned, what are the things that ails your particular organization? Is it representation? Or if you have representation, is it inclusion in a certain place? Is it, an aspect of an experience? You have to know what ails you. And so I'm a big fan of going, okay, like, what do you want to be where DEI is concerned? What are your aspirations, right? And then from that, what is your strategy? Then what are the gaps? How far are you from where you want to be? And then, and only then, should you go, what are the things that I should measure that will give me an idea of where I am compared to where I want to be? Because this is what people do with data, right? They go, what kind of data do we have? And then they spin up things and they put it out there and they wonder why nobody ever looks at it. You've got to be focused, right? And it's got to be aligned with what you're trying to do. And that will give people a reason to continually look at it, to monitor progress. And so that's why what's critical for you is really, it depends, because the answer is it depends on what ails you. Measure specifically around the things that you're trying to improve related to who and where you're trying to be.
Excellent. Thank you. That wasn't a politician answer at all. That was clear and scripted. I loved it.
I just feel your answer so deeply, Meisha-ann, and I just feel like it can be tempting when you're asked a question like this, as we so often are, to just like list off metrics that are available, that exist in your systems, are 100% there, are updated with quality, et cetera. It's just you're not going to have the impact you might want to have if you take that approach. I really like that process-based approach that you mentioned, like figuring out what ails you, I think you said, and then actioning toward that. I think I'm going to amplify that and then just add like a little bit of even more business flavor to it. I think sometimes what I observe when asked questions like this is we're starting from an HR lens or even a DEI lens. We're thinking like, what is it that HR wants to do? What is our priority within HR? I think we have to start with a business lens as much as possible. What is it that your company actually cares about? What outcome are leaders trying to optimize for? What are they reinforced for optimizing for? Really understand that and work back from it. I think if you prioritize something like quality indicators, great. Deep dive your quality data and figure out what is enabling your employees to produce results with absolutely excellent quality and what is blocking them or causing poor quality issues or quality incidents. And then you apply your HR or DEI lens, you pick apart those blockers, you figure out what is it, like Meisha-ann was talking about, is it more of a, we don't have access to the right staff with the right skills, diversity issue? Is it more a, we're not coordinating correctly and including people when they need to be included issue? Is it, there's a critical value creating team that has some perceptions or realities around inequity or unfairness that is demotivating them? What is it? Really pick at it until you understand it and then fix it. Like actually invest the time to fix that primary blocker, observe the change, show that you have had the impact with that change because you did start with complete real understanding of the issue, and then move on to the next gap again and again. And so the metrics you track are the metrics that are most likely to actually influence company success and are actually targeted at, to Meisha-ann's point, the things that are actually blocking and ailing you at the moment. But yeah, so, and it depends answer as well, I guess, from me.
So I have a specific illustrative example related to what you just said. So my company is an HR technology company, which is a poor way of explaining what we do. Like, we create positive human experiences using technology as a lever is really what we do. And so one of our biggest offerings is social recognition. So we have this one client in the healthcare space. And to your point, Marina, you have to know which metrics your business cares about. In healthcare, patient satisfaction is a big deal. So I want to tell you that for the recognition data that we look at in our system, we look at, are there differences in experience? Are there some groups that are more compensated from this recognition program than others? Are people having their accomplishments being described differently if they are different genders or races, et cetera? We do all of that. So with this one healthcare client, we did a study looking at the different hospitals and the extent to which they recognized the different demographics represented in the hospital. And we did this several years ago, and we found that the hospitals that were really good at that had higher patient satisfaction. And then a few years later, we did the exact same study and found the exact same thing. And this is the kind of energy I want to bring to this work, because now instead of just talking about, hey, you need to make sure you recognize your different populations in an equitable way, now you're going, because in addition to that being the right thing to do, your patients will actually feel it. It will actually accomplish your metrics. Then we did additional modeling and we said, you know how this works? This works by making people feel like they're included. And when people feel like they're included, they have the emotional energy to direct outwards and to focus on your patients. So I think in this space, we need to get creative and put all of these things together so that we have a more nuanced plan and a more nuanced story about why and how organizations should focus on these things.
You know, the similarity that's coming up for me in both of your responses is the importance of the process that you're using. And I think the watch out that I'm seeing in organizations is that when they run a process and things fall out, right? They don't get the outcome that they were looking for. They then tinker with the outcome. Or let's augment the outcome now and let's make some special choices or bring special things in. Where in reality, it's, did your process not work? Did your process not give you the outcome that you wanted? Go back and fix process. That's how people then feel included, because they understand how you got from A to Z. And they understand that there's a legitimacy in the way that you're presenting those data. And we titled this session, Are People Messing with the Data, right? Are they actually moving the numbers? Because you can make numbers say anything you want them to say. But what I'm hearing both of you say is that the integrity of the process, the way you collect the data, is what gives you more insights to go back and figure out what's not working in my process, and let's focus on fixing that. Thank you for that. I think that's super helpful.
I think one leader that I worked with used to have this phrase that has really stuck with me that I feel like I'm becoming a meme with my team because I say it too much probably. But she used to say, what is the rootiest of root causes that we have control over for this problem? We don't want to create short-term superficial solves. We don't want to market that we've solved something and not actually solved something for the long term. What is the rootiest root cause? And so we just kind of keep whying until we get to like the thing that we think we can affect still, but is the foundational issue, and then see if we actually affect it.
I did want to add one thing to the conversation as well. When we think about metrics I do a lot of employee listening, right? So there are several ways to listen to employees, several ways to use data. And when we look at employee voice, that's data generation to create context for more objective metrics that we can use to measure. And one of the mistakes that I see is everybody goes to these inclusion scores. Everybody wants to use an inclusion. Tell me what your inclusion index says. And they're usually abnormally high, right? You have to understand how bad your organization has to be to get low inclusion scores, right? You have to be it has to be so outrightly bad that people are willing to say this is absolute garbage, right? Inclusion scores are usually inflated. One reason is they're usually transparently asked as questions, right? I feel included here, right? Those are usually what it is. People know exactly what are the answer that you're trying to get. So inclusion scores tend to not be helpful. But what I've been advising a lot of organizations, using in my own organization and doing a lot of consulting for clients, is look at other scores. The most important score you need to look at, in my opinion, for any annual survey or pulse survey is your ethics score. and then cut those ethics questions by demographic. Then you'll see it. If you have a question asking if people feel safe to speak up without fear of retribution or retaliation, take that score and cut it by demographic. Because that's one of the things we don't do often in sentiment. We don't cut it. We look at the aggregate score and we're like, oh, everything is great, right? Everything looks good. Same thing we sometimes do with recognition questions. I've seen that too. When you look at recognition questions and then you ask, I feel recognized in my job for when I do a good job. Look at it. Take that metric and slice it by key demographics. And I'm not just talking about ethnic demographics, I'm talking about gender demographics, sex demographics, geographic demographics, right? See if there's a difference, because there's often sometimes a big correlation between the two things. So, for example, I remember I was doing research with one company and they were trying to find out the difference between the employees at a science-based organization, and come to find out, and this was in India, come to find out that all of the lead scientists were male and all of were men, and all of the, whether they had the exact same degree and the exact same experience, they were all assistants. They were all considered assistants, right? And so there's a cultural issue. So in this company, there's this cultural issue that they were not paying attention to in what was happening in that organization. So they were like, what is going on with this gender stuff? I'm like, hold on. What's going on from a cultural perspective? That all of the women are all assistants. What is going on there? Because you have to solve that issue. To your point, Marina, what's the rootiest part of the issue, right? That it's easy to say that we have inequity over in India, right? In this organization. But there's also, there appears to be a cultural issue that all of them, every last one of them, and nobody sees this. I'm like, you can't judge it from US eyes, right? And I've seen that in other countries. They go, you look at Brazil, you look at UK, you look at different countries within the EU, and everybody wants to judge things with the same eyes. And so that's why it's important when you look at sentiment metrics, when you look at these metrics, you look at it within context. And that's what voice data and sentiment data give you. Context that you probably would have never thought about in terms of the metrics of your DEI.
So I have a couple of things to add based on what Kalifa said. So number one, going back to one of the initial questions, what are the things that we're not talking about in this space that we should be? One is ethnocentrism, to Kalifa's point, right? Like looking at inclusion, diversity, equity through American eyes. It's a big issue. But number two, something that you said made me think of this. We talk about systemic bias all the time, but we are not disciplined about interrogating the systems by which people get access to opportunities in organizations. So let's think about, for example, performance feedback. Textio has a lot of great research on this. If you look at performance feedback and you look past the ratings, you will see language differences that have implications for people's access to opportunities. How many people are doing this kind of research in organizations? So we had a client where on their engagement survey, the question, I receive feedback, was positively correlated to their engagement for everybody except for Black people. Now, they were collecting, so we have this tool where you can request feedback on your performance, right? And people can give you feedback. So it kind of puts the idea of a 360 in the hands of the employee. But also what that means is that we have the text that we can look at. So we went back and we looked at the text of the feedback of Black employees. And would you know, we found that they were getting crappy feedback. Now, if you want to know what crappy feedback is, read the Textio report, but they were getting crappy feedback. And this, again, is the kind of energy we need in this space. We need to look past the easy, right? And get really curious. What's happening? Why is it happening? So that, to Marina's point, we can get to the rootiest of root causes. And I'm totally stealing that.
Yeah, sure, me too. It's stolen. Consider it stolen.
I think there's something to that too, Meisha-ann, of you're just I will absolutely read those papers, and I'm immediately thinking about like, okay, if the language that we're using in performance feedback is different, the language that we're using in live one-on-ones is probably different. If we do check-ins throughout the year, it's probably different. When we set expectations with people in the first place, it was probably different. When we pitched roles, it was probably different. And once you start like sort of peeling it back, you see, again, it's like another human behavior issue that we see like signals of in these ways. And if you really keep working to understand it and kind of work backwards, perhaps you can solve it closer to the beginning.
Right. And Marina, it starts in the interview, right? It's that same thing that you're saying, starts in the interview and selection process. You get these people, they come in, they're different in whatever demographic way, right? And then you speak to them, you're asking the same structured question, but your expectation of their answers are different. And often, if you go in and assess the scoring that is done on rubrics based on people, you will realize the expectations of that answer was different. You set higher standards generally for historically marginalized groups. You set higher standards in your rating for Black people, for Black women. Like you're setting a different standard, and people will always chalk it up to unconscious bias. But I'm going to tell you here, while I fully believe in unconscious bias, I also believe in conscious action. If you are intentional about the things you do, yes, your brain is going to do everything it can to help you survive and do shortcuts. But you've got to know that you scored these two people on different rubric, right? That is a conscious choice you made when you hit submit. So I often tell people I don't want to hear anything about unconscious bias if you made an active decision after the fact. You weren't running away from a tiger to survive. So let's be all honest.
This has been such a dynamic conversation, and I love the way you've built on each other's thoughts. I think what would be really helpful for our practitioners is to get some hands-on advice from you for those that are starting out in their data journey and they're trying to figure out what's the right approach and how do I go about this and what data do I need and who are my resources. What advice would you have for those? And I'd love to start with Andy and then hear from all of you if we could.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I'm going to take maybe a different approach here. You know, oftentimes I think we work to take the personal out of our work, right? Take some of the emotion out. And in my mind, that's a mistake overall. But certainly in this space, to me, I would make it personal. And, you know, we did start off the call intentionally talking about our why. And if you're going to be in this space, in my mind, you've got to have and understand your why, because there's going to be challenging times. So, you know, welcome to the party. We're all in this together, but do some self-reflection on why are you in the game, and what's driving and motivating you personally. And then you can get into the data components and what access to data do you have today. And I think, Meisha's point earlier around alignment, I think is very critical here. Sometimes it's not the data and these other aspects that we're going down these rabbit holes. It's getting alignment on what are we trying to do with the information before we go and collect that information. And getting that alignment up front and really being bold there and pushing. This is another space where I think having passion, but also making your voice heard. There's a tendency, for folks to maybe regulate internally on that voice. And, I've learned the most, I think, from folks that were willing to take a stand and, have that level of confidence to raise an issue that maybe people didn't want to talk about. And so again, to me, that comes back to that initial piece of why are you in it? What's your motivating factor? But the other piece of it is don't stop, don't be discouraged, and find folks that are also similarly motivated so that you can sustain that work over time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'll jump in here too. I think if you're starting out, there are a couple pieces of advice I'll give. One is to shut up. Let me explain what I mean. Shut up and let the data talk to you. When you're trying to figure out the data you need, do not assume that you know all of the right data. Do not even assume that the leaders who've brought you in know the data they're looking for, right? Do not try to back data into what you think leaders want to hear. Learn to lean on the data. Let the data lead you. So the best thing you can do is to be quiet and let that data talk. Let that data speak to you. I think that's really important. I think many of us, we come in hot. You know what I mean? I'm guilty of it too. You see data, you're ready to swim in it, backstroke in it, just have fun with it. You know what I mean? Because we come in and we're passionate and we want to create a change. But recognize that a lot of what you'll be doing in the beginning is not sexy. It's not pretty. It's in the weeds. It's structuring the data. It's cleaning the data. It's trying to untangle the mess that data can be in, right? So you often see the end of it and not the beginning. And a lot of it is in the weeds. I'm sure everybody here on this panel has sat in front of a data set and did a sigh because you knew it's going to take a while before you're going to get anything out of this data because it's an absolute mess. I have watched HRIS systems, turned off the computer, got up, walked away, and came back to it, right? And so recognize that data is not going to come in perfectly because a lot of people who are designing the data tools, they're not being optimized and they're not setting it up correctly. And we know better. So we have a lot of cleaning up to do. But also recognize that even in the imperfect data, a lot of what you're trying to do will require you to do some things that just, it's exhausting, it's repetitive, it's not fun. And you have to let that data speak to you. The other thing is when you are working with data and you're thinking it through, remember that data is part of how you make a decision. DEI is about how it impacts people, right? You have to think through if data is saying this, what is the context with it? Don't assume you know everything and don't assume you have all of the context. Always give yourself margin for error. Sometimes the context is the business, sometimes the context is that you don't have voice data, sometimes it's an economic factor that you didn't think through. It's a recency thing. And the biggest example I give everybody is when you think you have fancy forecasting models, always think back to the people who had beautiful forecasts in 2019 and every forecast was wrong. Every forecast was wrong. Nobody could have predicted a pandemic. Sorry, nobody could have predicted that their data was just going to be completely wrong, right? And so that's what happens when you were leaning only on your data with absolutely no context. The companies that took their time to really contextualize their data were able to recover faster. And that is especially true with DEI. And if you are committed to DEI, and you're starting out on that journey, recognize that data is your friend. You have to lead with it and recognize that the data can be wrong without the right context of that data.
Thank you. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, just about 30 seconds each, but I'd love to hear from Meisha or Marina.
Yes, I can go. One of the things that I would recommend is don't forget about the basics. You know, we're in the age of AI and predictive modeling, and all of that is sexy. But let's not forget about the power of defining metrics that people need to see to measure their progress towards where they need to go and want to go. And what I recommend here is something I call a metrics map. So each metric literally listed out. Which goal is it related to? Where do you find the data? Who's responsible for it? What does good and bad look like for each metric? And then also for each metric, who's the owner? So when the metric is bad, when it reaches the threshold that you've previously determined, who takes action on it and what is that action? And that way you can keep it aligned to strategy and moving towards the future that you dreamed up for yourself when you were doing your vision statements.
Fantastic. Thanks. Marina, did you want to add something?
Maybe just add quickly, I love metrics maps as well. There's a person on my team who's excellent at adding a column in that map for rationale, which really helps from a change management perspective and in general, like educating people about what metrics matter and why they matter. But if you always write down the reason you included it in the map there, it can be a very nice repository for your own team's information, but also can help to thwart any sort of opinions from folks who are not as close to it to just quickly understand the why.
Excellent. Well, Marina, Andy, Meisha-ann, Kalifa, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us. I really believe that our practitioners and our listeners have gotten a great wealth of knowledge, absolutely free right now. So it's like having this consultation with experts. So thank you. We are going to be taking a break from our panel discussions in October because we are running our summit, which will be on October 16th. It's a large scale event. So definitely hope that you all will participate in that. And then we'll be back with another panel discussion in December. So in November. So looking forward to seeing all of you participate in that. And again, thank you to my wonderful guests. This has been a fantastic session. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.